My client is entitled to half her fortune, Bradley's attorney declared, his voice echoing against the oak-paneled walls of the courtroom. The words made my stomach twist, but I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me. My name is Claire Harrison. I'm 46 years old, and I never thought I'd find myself in divorce court fighting not for love, not for dignity, but for the right to keep what generations of my family had built. Across the aisle sat my husband Bradley, with that smug grin he'd perfected, the kind of grin that once charmed me and now made me sick. His designer suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his golden cufflinks winking like they were mocking me. I remembered buying those cufflinks for his birthday 2 years ago, a gift he didn't deserve then, and certainly didn't deserve now. Bradley leaned back in his chair, as if the case was already won. To him, this was a formality, a victory lap before he collected his prize. Half of all marital assets, his lawyer repeated, his tone dripping with greed, including Mrs. Harrison's inheritance. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters had shown up for this trial. Nashville's business community loved a scandal, and the idea of a man walking away with millions from a divorce was irresistible gossip. I felt every pair of eyes burning into me, waiting to see if the cold businesswoman would break, if I'd beg or cry, but I didn't, because sitting in my purse, right by my feet, was an envelope. And inside that envelope was the reason I wasn't afraid. Mrs. Harrison, Judge Whitaker addressed me directly. He was a stern man in his 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of courtroom theatrics. Do you have any response to your husband's claims? I rose slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt, my heart pounding in my ears. Bradley smirked, certain I had nothing, but I met the judge's gaze, steady and calm. Yes, Your Honor, I said softly. My fingers brushed the edge of my purse, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. I believe there's something the court needs to see. But before I present it, I want you to understand how we got here. Because this case isn't just about numbers, it's about betrayal. As I spoke, my mind drifted back 5 years to the night I first met Bradley. It was at a charity gala downtown, one of those glittering events where everyone wore tuxedos and designer gowns, pretending generosity while secretly competing for attention. I hadn't even wanted to go. I'd been drowning in work at the consulting firm I had built from scratch, Brightline Analytics, but a colleague convinced me to attend. I was standing alone by the dessert table when Bradley appeared. You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here, he said with a smile that seemed disarmingly genuine. I laughed, caught off guard, and for the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. He was attentive, warm, endlessly curious about me. He asked about my work, my passions, my family. For hours we talked, and for the first time since my grandmother's passing, I felt like someone saw me. Not the CEO, not the wealthy woman, just me. Looking back, I realized now what he was doing. He wasn't falling in love. He was collecting data, the way a hunter studies his prey. Every question was calculated, every smile rehearsed. But at the time, I was vulnerable, lonely, and aching for connection. He moved quickly, sweeping me off my feet with lavish gestures I mistook for love. Candlelit dinners, surprise weekend trips, a proposal after just 8 months, on a riverboat under the stars, complete with a string quartet. It was the kind of storybook romance women dream of, and I foolishly believed it. What I didn't know was that Bradley had been planning his move from the very beginning. In those early months, I ignored the warning signs that now feel so glaring. Bradley always seemed to have money for extravagant dinners and trips, yet his job as a mid-level sales manager couldn't possibly have covered it. When I asked, he'd chuckle and brush it off. I believe in investing in us, he'd say, sliding his credit card across the table like a magician pulling off a trick. I mistook his recklessness for generosity, his insistence on handling bills for responsibility. My friends teased me that I had finally found a man who adored me, who didn't care that I worked long hours and came home exhausted. But sometimes, late at night, I caught a glimmer in his eyes when we talked about money, something hungry, almost feral. I should have listened to that instinct. Instead, I convinced myself I was lucky. When he proposed, my attorney and closest confidant, Sarah Langley, urged me to consider a prenuptial agreement. "Claire, you've built your firm from the ground up," she said firmly. "You need to protect it. I was embarrassed, almost ashamed to bring it up with Bradley. I expected anger or accusations, but to my surprise, he laughed. Of course, darling. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for you. He signed it without hesitation, even making a joke about how love doesn't need fine print. His casualness disarmed me, and for the first time in months, I let my guard down. Sarah drafted the agreement carefully, protecting not just my existing business but any inheritance or future assets. This will ensure your grandmother's estate stays in your family, she told me. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now, I know she was saving my life. 2 years into our marriage, the call came that changed everything. My grandmother's attorney informed me she had left me her entire estate, her house, her investments, her rare book collection, and nearly $3 million in carefully managed funds. I remember sitting at the kitchen table stunned, tears streaming down my face as I read the letter aloud. Bradley's reaction was telling, though I didn't see it then. His eyes widened and he grabbed my hands. $3 million, he whispered, almost reverently. Claire, we're rich. The way he said we should have stopped me cold, but I was too caught up in grief and gratitude, too overwhelmed by memories of my grandmother, to notice the calculation already spinning in his mind. After that day, everything shifted. Bradley quit his job within 6 months, claiming he wanted to support me and explore new opportunities. In reality, he was burning through my inheritance like it was his personal play money. A luxury car, a doomed investment in a friend's restaurant, a country club membership, every decision made without me, every bill handed over with the assumption I would pay. At first I resisted, but he would always twist the conversation. We're a team, Claire. Couples don't keep score. Don't you trust me? And little by little, I stopped fighting. I told myself love meant compromise. But deep down, a quiet voice was whispering that I had married a man who saw me not as a partner, but as a paycheck. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon when I found an email left open on Bradley's laptop. He had gone out to play golf, leaving his computer on the counter. Normally, I respected privacy, but something about the subject line, divorce strategy, froze me in my tracks. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. There it was, a thread of messages between Bradley and a divorce attorney I'd never heard of. They'd been discussing timing, assets, Tennessee divorce law, even calculating how much he could claim from my inheritance. I read the words over and over, my stomach twisting with nausea. The man who had toasted to our forever on a riverboat was plotting my financial ruin like it was a business deal. I closed the laptop, sat down at the table, and for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I planned. That night I called Sarah. Her voice was steady, calm, like the anchor I desperately needed. Claire, she said, we've been preparing for this from day one. Remember the prenup? Remember how thorough we were? He can't touch your grandmother's money. Not a cent. But he doesn't know that, does he? I shook my head, tears finally breaking free. He thinks he's going to take everything. Sarah's tone sharpened. Then let him walk into that courtroom with all the arrogance in the world. And then you'll hand the judge that envelope, and we'll watch his entire scheme fall apart. The months leading up to the trial were a blur of icy silence and staged affection. Bradley still pretended to be the doting husband in public, holding my hand at dinners, posting photos of us smiling on vacation, spinning a story of marital bliss. But behind closed doors, he was distant, dismissive, and calculating. I could feel him slipping away, every word rehearsed, every touch hollow. It was like living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. Sometimes I wanted to scream, to throw the prenup on the table, and watch his mask crack right then and there. But I waited. I waited because justice tastes sweeter when it's served at the perfect moment. The morning of the trial, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy suit, understated jewelry, and my grandmother's locket resting against my collarbone. Bradley, of course, arrived in a tailored suit and a smirk, strutting into the courtroom as if it already belonged to him. His lawyer rattled off demands. Half my inheritance, half my business, half my life. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. I sat there quietly, my hands resting on the purse at my feet, the envelope inside like a loaded weapon. When the judge turned to me and asked if I had a response, I rose, smoothed my skirt, and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I believe the court should review this document before proceeding." I withdrew the envelope and placed it in the judge's hand. Bradley's smile faltered, just slightly, and I felt the first flicker of victory. The judge slid open the envelope with slow precision, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose as he unfolded the thick document inside. The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratching of reporters' pens. I sat very still, watching Bradley from the corner of my eye. His smugness had started to crack. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney, but I could see the confusion in his face. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. "This appears to be a prenuptial agreement," he announced, his tone even, but there was a faint glimmer of interest in his eyes. "Executed prior to marriage, signed by both parties, and notarized." The gallery erupted in whispers. Bradley's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We were not made aware of any prenuptial agreement." The judge silenced him with a single look. "Sit down, Mr. Fulton. You'll have time to review the document. For now, I'll examine its validity." I dared a glance at Bradley. His face had drained of color, his lips pressed into a thin line. He shook his head minutely, as if he could will the paper out of existence. "This can't be real," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. My attorney, Sarah, leaned close and whispered, "Watch him unravel." And unravel he did. As the judge flipped page after page, Bradley grew restless, shifting in his chair, tapping his pen furiously against the table. Every clause the judge read out loud tightened the noose. All assets owned prior to marriage remain separate property. Any inheritance during marriage remains the sole property of the inheriting spouse. Neither party shall be entitled to spousal support regardless of income disparity. Each sentence was a dagger slicing through his grand plan. When the judge looked up again, his expression was firm. "This prenuptial agreement is not only valid, but it's one of the most comprehensive I've seen in 20 years. Bradley's attorney tried to salvage the situation, stammering about fraud, duress, misrepresentation. "My client was told it was a formality," he insisted. "He didn't fully understand." The judge cut him off, his voice like steel. "Are you suggesting your client signed a binding legal document without reading it?" The courtroom chuckled, the sound sharp and humiliating. Bradley's ears flushed crimson as he sputtered, "I skimmed it." She said it didn't matter. Judge Whitaker's brows arched. "So you admit you voluntarily signed this agreement, waived your right to independent counsel, and ignored the warnings clearly outlined in the document?" Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence was damning. And then, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, Sarah rose smoothly, a folder in her hand. "Your Honor, in addition to the prenup, we have complete financial records showing Mrs. Harrison has kept her inheritance entirely separate from marital funds. Household expenses were paid from her salary, not her grandmother's estate. Every dollar of inheritance remains in a separate account, untouched." The judge accepted the folder, flipping through it quickly, then nodded. "Impeccable record-keeping," he said, almost impressed. I sat back in my chair, a calm settling over me. For months I had lived with dread, waiting for Bradley to take everything. But now, in front of an audience of strangers and reporters, his empire of lies was collapsing, and I didn't have to raise my voice, or beg, or cry. All I had to do was let the truth speak for itself. Bradley couldn't keep his composure any longer. He slammed his palm on the table, startling even his attorney. "This is insane," he barked, his voice echoing through the room. "I've been married to her for 5 years. I gave up my career to support her. I built this life with her. Don't I deserve something?" His desperation hung in the air, but it wasn't sympathy he received. The spectators shifted uncomfortably, a few reporters stifling laughs behind their pens. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, his voice cool and sharp. "Mr. Harrison, what you're describing is not sacrifice. It is choice. And according to this agreement, your choice has consequences." Bradley's face flushed crimson. He turned toward me, eyes blazing. "You tricked me, Claire. You set me up with this paperwork like I was some kind of fool." I met his rage with calm. "No, Bradley. You did that to yourself the day you signed without reading." Sarah squeezed my arm under the table, silently reminding me to stay composed. Bradley's lawyer was frantically whispering, tugging on his sleeve, but Bradley shoved him away. "I won't be humiliated like this," he shouted, standing abruptly. The judge's gavel cracked against the desk. "Sit down, or I will have you removed." Bradley hesitated, his chest heaving, before collapsing back into his chair like a petulant child. The image of the polished, charming husband he had cultivated for years was gone. What remained was the truth. A greedy, entitled man who had married me not for love, but for a payout. The gallery could see it. The reporter scribbled faster, eager to capture every second of his downfall. Then came the final blow. Judge Whitaker adjusted his glasses, his tone deliberate. This prenuptial agreement leaves you, Mr. Harrison, with no claim to your wife's premarital assets, inheritance, or business. Furthermore, according to its terms, debts incurred individually remain the responsibility of the debtor. He looked at me. Mrs. Harrison, do you have documentation of debts your husband accrued? Sarah stood, handing over another folder. Yes, Your Honor. Credit cards, a car loan, failed investments, country club fees, approximately $82,000. The murmur that followed was deafening. Bradley's jaw dropped as if he'd been struck. The judge's gaze cut into him like a blade. Mr. Harrison, not only will you not receive assets, but you will remain personally responsible for $82,000 in debt. Consider this an expensive lesson in reading before signing. The gavel came down with a final, thunderous crack. The courtroom erupted with whispers, gasps, even a chuckle or two. Bradley sat frozen, his face pale, his mouth open but wordless. His attorney quietly gathered his papers, clearly eager to escape the wreckage of his client's humiliation. Reporters swarmed near the exit, cameras flashing, pens scribbling the story of the man who tried to steal millions and walked away bankrupt instead. I sat still for a moment longer, letting the moment settle deep into my bones. After months of fear, of silence, of betrayal, I had won. Not just the case, not just my inheritance, but something far more precious, my dignity. Bradley's fall was swift and merciless. Within weeks, whispers spread through Nashville's business circles. The charming husband who once bragged about being an entrepreneur was now infamous as the man who tried to rob his wife and got laughed out of court. The country club revoked his membership when he failed to pay his dues. The luxury car was repossessed, his credit cards maxed out. By spring, he was living in his parents' basement in Memphis, sulking in the shadow of the life he thought he'd secured. Reporters called him a cautionary tale. Women in social circles warned each other about him, and even his friends kept their distance. Bradley had wanted to build his fortune on my back. Instead, his greed had buried him under a mountain of debt and disgrace. As for me, I chose to transform the pain into purpose. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established the Harrison Foundation, dedicated to helping women secure legal protection in marriage and divorce. I partnered with Sarah, who became the foundation's legal director, and together we gave countless women the tools to avoid predators like Bradley. Every time I stood in front of a group explaining the importance of prenuptial agreements, I thought of my grandmother. She had always taught me that strength comes not from avoiding storms, but from learning to stand tall in them. In a way, she had saved me twice, once by leaving me her legacy, and again by reminding me to guard it fiercely. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the woman I was when I met Bradley, lonely, vulnerable, willing to ignore red flags because I craved companionship. I don't hate her anymore. I've learned to forgive her because she's the one who fought back. She's the one who handed the judge that envelope and stood tall while her husband's lies crumbled around him. Bradley thought he was marrying into a fortune. What he didn't realize was that he had married a woman who refused to be anyone's prey. And that, in the end, was his undoing. So I'll leave you with this. If someone you loved tried to steal everything from you, your money, your home, your dignity, would you fight them in court, even if it meant airing every secret in public? Or would you walk away and let them think they'd won? I know what I chose. What would you do?